Words can open doors that should stay locked forever. Every time someone speaks certain phrases without knowing their true power, they create openings in the spiritual realm that dark forces are waiting to exploit. These are not random collections of letters and sounds. They carry weight, intention, and consequences that reach far beyond what most people can see or understand. The problem is that many of these phrases sound completely normal. They get used in everyday conversations, in moments of frustration, in jokes, and even in songs. Nobody thinks twice about saying them, but on the other side of the veil, something hears and something responds. Think about how many times words have been thrown around carelessly. How many times something was said just because it felt right in the moment. What if those moments were actually invitations? What if certain combinations of words act like keys, unlocking spiritual doors that were meant to stay closed? This video will reveal 5 specific phrases that do exactly that. These are phrases that invite demonic influence into the lives of those who speak them. Each one will be explained in detail, including why it works, what makes it dangerous, and how it creates an opening for darkness to enter. This information could change everything about how words are used from this point forward. To get the full understanding and protection this video offers, it is crucial not to skip any part. If time is limited, watch at 1.5 or 2 times speed instead of jumping around, because missing even one phrase could leave a door open that should be sealed. Let's dive right in. Think about how many times this shows up in normal conversations. Someone sees a fancy car and says it. A person wants a better job and says it. Maybe there's a dream house or a relationship that feels just out of reach, and boom, the words come out. The phrase sounds harmless enough at first. It feels like just another way to say how badly something is wanted. But here's the thing that most people miss completely. When those specific words leave the mouth, something on the other side is actually listening and taking notes. The first phrase that opens demonic doors is this: "I would sell my soul for that." Now, before anyone thinks this is just about old stories or ancient history, let's talk about right now. This phrase gets thrown around constantly. It shows up in songs, in movies, in casual chats with friends. Someone really wants concert tickets and says it. Someone desperately needs money and says it. The worst part is that most people genuinely believe it means nothing because they're not serious. They think the joking tone or the casual delivery makes it safe.
Wrong.
Dead wrong. Here's what actually happens when these words get spoken. In the spiritual realm, words work like contracts. Think of it like signing a paper without reading the fine print. The person speaking thinks they're just expressing strong desire, but what they're actually doing is making an offer. And here's the part that should make everyone's skin crawl. There are beings whose entire job is to listen for these offers and accept them. They don't care if the person was joking. They don't care if it was said in frustration or excitement. All they hear is someone saying they're willing to trade the most valuable thing they possess for something temporary. The soul isn't just some mysterious concept. It's the core of who someone is. It's their connection to everything good, pure, and protected. When someone offers to sell it, even casually, they're basically putting up a for sale sign on their spiritual protection. Demons see that sign and they come running. They take those words seriously because in their realm, verbal agreements hold weight. It doesn't matter what the person intended. What matters is what was said. This gets even deeper when looking at how this phrase became so normal. Entertainment has made it seem cool or edgy. Characters in shows say it, and nothing bad happens to them, so people think it's safe in real life too. But fiction and reality work on totally different rules. In the real world, speaking these words creates an actual opening. It's like leaving the front door unlocked, and then being shocked when unwanted guests walk right in. The effects don't always show up immediately, which makes it even more dangerous. Someone might say this phrase and feel fine for weeks or even months. But then things start shifting. Opportunities that should have worked out fall apart. Relationships that were solid start crumbling. There's this feeling of being spiritually empty, like something important is missing, but it's impossible to identify what. These aren't coincidences. These are the results of that door being opened. Now, picture someone stuck in traffic, late for something important, and the frustration builds until those words slip out. Or imagine a moment when technology stops working right before a deadline. The word flies out almost automatically. Most people have said it so many times that it doesn't even register anymore. It's become background noise in everyday language. But what if that background noise was actually creating very real foreground problems? The second phrase that invites demons in is this: any form of the word damn. Whether it's the full version or the casual abbreviations, whether it's directed at someone else or just muttered under the breath, it all carries the same weight. And that weight is heavy. This word literally means to condemn something or someone to hell. That's not an exaggeration or a dramatic interpretation. That's the actual definition. Every time it gets spoken, someone is pronouncing eternal judgment. Think about how wild that is for a second. Most people would never stand in front of another person and seriously tell them they deserve eternal suffering. That would feel cruel and excessive. But this word gets tossed around dozens of times a day without a second thought. The casual use doesn't change what it means. It just means people are speaking curses without understanding they're doing it. Here's where it gets emotional and real. Imagine a parent who loves their child deeply, but has this word as part of their regular vocabulary. Every time they say it around that child, they're creating a spiritual atmosphere in their home. That atmosphere doesn't just disappear. It builds up over time. Or think about someone who constantly uses this word on themselves when they make mistakes. Every single time they're speaking judgment over their own life. They're literally inviting the very thing the word describes. Words aren't just sounds that disappear into the air. They create realities. When someone speaks blessing over another person, that blessing has power. When someone speaks curses, even casual ones, those curses have power too. The spiritual realm doesn't grade on a curve based on how serious the speaker was feeling. It responds to what was actually said. This word, because it's used so often, creates constant invitations for darkness to move in. The really heartbreaking part is watching how this affects relationships. When this word gets used in arguments or moments of anger toward another person, it's not just harsh language. It's an actual spiritual attack. The person on the receiving end might not understand why they suddenly feel heavier or more burdened after certain conversations. The speaker might not realize they just handed demons an assignment against someone they probably care about. But the damage gets done regardless of awareness. This phrase also works like a boomerang. What gets sent out tends to come back. Someone who regularly speaks this word over others will eventually find their own life falling under similar darkness. It's a principle that plays out over and over. The mouth that curses others becomes a mouth that brings curses upon itself. And when it becomes a habit, when it's said multiple times every single day, the compounding effect is massive. Each use adds another layer, another opening, another invitation for things that should stay far away. All right, let's get into something that happens way more than anyone wants to admit. Anger is a wild thing. It can turn the calmest person into someone who says things they never imagined they'd say. And when that anger peaks, when someone feels completely done with another person, this phrase comes out. Maybe it's after a betrayal. Maybe it's during a heated argument. Maybe it's just frustration that's been building for too long. But once these words leave the mouth, they don't just evaporate. They go to work. The third phrase is this: go to hell or burn in hell. And wow, does this one pack a punch. When someone tells another person to go to hell, they're not just expressing anger. They're pronouncing a destination. They're speaking an eternal curse over that person's life. This is heavy stuff because it's taking human anger and turning it into a spiritual weapon. And here's what makes this so intense. That weapon doesn't just hit the target. It comes back and hits the person who threw it. Think about what's really happening when someone says this. They're so upset, so hurt, so angry that they want another human being to experience the worst possible outcome forever. Not just a bad day, not just some temporary consequence, literally the worst thing that could ever happen. That level of hatred creates a feast for demons. They thrive on that energy. They gather around situations where this phrase gets spoken because it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet of negativity and darkness. But here's the twist that catches everyone off guard. The person speaking this curse over someone else is actually damaging their own spiritual protection in the process. It's like trying to throw poison at someone while standing in a room with no ventilation. That poison is going to affect everyone present, including the person who released it. The spiritual principle at work here is simple but powerful. Curses don't travel in straight lines. They circle back. What gets sent out into the universe finds its way home. There's also this wild thing about how demons handle these situations. When someone speaks hell over another person, demons literally receive that as an assignment. They hear it as permission to go afflict that individual. But they also note who gave them that permission. And they remember. So not only does the target potentially deal with spiritual attacks, but the speaker also becomes known in the demonic realm as someone who uses curses. That's not a list anyone wants to be on. The long-term effects of using this phrase are brutal. Relationships get destroyed beyond repair. The person who said it might feel justified in the moment, but later when things settle, there's this weight that doesn't go away. It's the weight of knowing something was said that can't be unsaid. And spiritually, doors that got opened during that moment of rage stay open unless they're intentionally closed. Meanwhile, demons that were invited in during that exchange set up camp and start influencing thoughts, decisions, and emotions. What makes this even more dangerous is how casually this phrase shows up in modern culture. People say it in jokes. It gets used in entertainment. Someone cuts someone off in traffic and boom, there it is. But every single use carries the same spiritual weight. There's no discount for casual use. There's no exemption for jokes. Each time it's spoken, the same doors swing open and the same invitations go out. This is why being aware of what comes out of the mouth matters so much. These aren't just words. They're spiritual agreements that have real consequences in the physical world. Now on to the next phrase. This one is a lesson that cuts deep and needs to be taken seriously. There's something about involving the creator of everything in a lie that crosses a line most people don't even realize exists. This isn't just about being dishonest. This is about dragging the sacred into the mud and using it as decoration for deception. And the spiritual consequences for this are massive. The fourth phrase is this: I swear to God, especially when it's used to back up something that isn't true. This happens all the time. Someone wants to be believed so badly that they invoke God as their witness. They call on the highest power in existence to vouch for their words. And then those words turn out to be lies. Think about what that means. It's taking the name that represents all truth and all holiness and using it as a tool for manipulation. There's an ancient commandment about this. It says, do not take the name of God in vain. Most people hear that and think it just means don't curse using God's name. But it goes so much deeper. Taking God's name in vain means using it emptily, carelessly, or for purposes that mock what it represents. When someone swears to God about something false, they're doing exactly that. They're treating something sacred like it's a prop in their personal drama. Here's where the spiritual reality gets intense. God doesn't take kindly to being misrepresented. And demons absolutely love it when people do this because it creates a crack in that person's spiritual protection. Think of it like this. When someone genuinely calls on God with honesty and sincerity, there's power and protection in that. But when someone calls on God dishonestly, it's like trying to hide behind a shield that's no longer there. The protection doesn't work when it's being used for corrupt purposes. The damage this does to a person's relationship with God is heartbreaking. Every time someone swears to God while lying, they're building a wall between themselves and the very source of protection they need. They're training themselves to see God's name as just another tool, rather than recognizing it as holy. And over time, this creates such a disconnect that when they actually need to call on God sincerely, they find themselves unable to. The habit of dishonesty has rotted the foundation of their faith. Demons exploit this perfectly. They watch as people use God's name to lie, and they know exactly what that means. It means this person has confused priorities. It means they value being believed more than they value truth. It means their spiritual integrity is compromised. And compromised integrity is like a neon sign that says vulnerable target. Once demons see that, they move in and start creating chaos. Relationships fall apart because trust is broken. Opportunities disappear because credibility is shot. And spiritually, there's this oppression that settles in and won't leave. This phrase has become so normalized that people don't even register what they're doing anymore. Kids hear adults say it and copy it without understanding the weight. Friends use it casually to emphasize stories. But every use that isn't completely truthful is another instance of spiritual self-sabotage. It's volunteering to have doors open that should stay locked. And the saddest part is that most people doing this have no idea they're inviting in the very forces that will make their lives harder. They think they're just trying to be convincing. What they're actually doing is trading their spiritual protection for temporary credibility that won't even last once the lies are discovered. Now, I need you to stop and think about this for a moment. What happens when someone decides that the spiritual realm doesn't exist? What changes when a person looks at everything invisible and declares it fantasy? It might seem like nothing changes. After all, life goes on. The sun still rises. Work still happens. But underneath the surface, something massive shifts. And that shift creates a vulnerability that's almost impossible to explain to someone who doesn't believe in what's exploiting it. The fifth phrase is this: I don't believe in God, or any higher power, or the spiritual realm at all. And here's the wild part. The very act of denying spiritual reality is itself a spiritual decision with spiritual consequences. It's like standing in the rain and declaring that water doesn't exist. The declaration doesn't stop the rain. It just means the person gets soaked without knowing why. This phrase is exactly what demonic forces want to hear. Imagine being something that operates in darkness and shadows, and then hearing someone announce they don't believe such things exist. That's the perfect setup. It's like a thief being told the homeowner doesn't believe in burglaries, so they stopped locking their doors. The target just became exponentially easier. When someone denies the spiritual realm, they're not making themselves immune to it. They're just making themselves blind to it. Think about what gets lost in this denial. Discernment disappears because how can someone recognize a spiritual attack if they don't believe spiritual attacks are real? Protection vanishes because why would someone guard against something they think is made up? Awareness dissolves because there's no reason to pay attention to patterns that don't fit the material worldview. And all the while, the very things being denied are working freely without any resistance. There's this paradox that needs to be understood. Not believing in demons doesn't make them stop believing in someone. They don't care if they're acknowledged. In fact, they prefer not to be. It's easier to influence someone who thinks every negative thought is their own, every bad decision is just bad luck, every spiritual assault is just a rough day. The person keeps trying to fix things on the surface while the real problem operates completely unchallenged underneath. Have there been moments when things felt off but there was no logical explanation? Times when the same negative patterns kept repeating despite best efforts? Situations where bad things seem to cluster together for no reason. For someone who denies spiritual reality, these things get written off as coincidence or bad luck.
But what if they're not?
What if there's an actual source behind them that remains invisible only because the person refuses to look? This phrase gets promoted heavily in modern culture. Being skeptical is seen as intelligent. Believing in anything beyond what can be measured is treated as primitive. But that perspective comes with a cost. It strips away the tools needed to fight battles that are absolutely real. Someone wouldn't go into a physical fight blindfolded and with hands tied. But that's essentially what denying the spiritual realm does for spiritual warfare. It removes sight and removes weapons, and then acts surprised when wounds keep appearing. The people who suffer most from maintaining this position are often the ones who could benefit most from changing it. They're the ones experiencing darkness but calling it depression. They're the ones facing spiritual oppression but calling it stress. They're the ones under attack but thinking they're just having a bad year. And because they won't acknowledge the source, they can't access the solution. Demons use this phrase to keep people trapped in a cycle where they're constantly treating symptoms, but never the disease. The doors stay open because the person doesn't believe there are doors to close. So here's where everything comes together. 5 phrases, 5 doors, 5 invitations that most people didn't even realize they were sending out. Trading souls for temporary wants, speaking destruction casually, wishing hell on others, using God's name to cover lies, denying the very realm these forces operate in. Each one creates an opening. Each one gives permission. Each one brings consequences. But here's the hope part. Knowing this now changes everything. The doors that got open through ignorance don't have to stay open. Recognition is the first step. Repentance is the second. That means actually acknowledging these phrases were spoken, understanding why they're dangerous, and intentionally renouncing them. It means going back through memory and identifying every time these words left the mouth and actively taking back the permission that was given. Words opened these doors. Words can close them, speaking life instead of death, speaking blessings instead of curses, speaking truth instead of lies wrapped in God's name, speaking acknowledgement of spiritual reality instead of denial. This isn't complicated. It just requires being intentional about what comes out of the mouth going forward. Prayer works. Seeking spiritual cleansing works. Taking authority over what was unknowingly surrendered works. Now here's the real talk. After watching this entire video, after learning exactly what these phrases do and why they're dangerous, going back to using them would be beyond foolish. It would be like learning that certain food is poisoned and then eating it anyway. It would be choosing darkness after being shown the light. Anyone who walks away from this video and continues speaking these phrases into existence is actively choosing to keep those doors open. That's not ignorance anymore. That's just plain stupid. The responsibility is now clear. Examine what gets said daily. Teach others, especially kids who copy without understanding. Share this information because it could protect someone else from opening doors they don't know exist. The algorithm knows what needs to be watched next. That video appearing on the screen isn't random. It's the next piece of protection, the next level of awareness. Click it.
Watch it.
Keep building defenses, because now the knowledge is there. Now the power to choose differently exists. Use it wisely. Seal what was opened. Speak what brings life. And never go back to the phrases that invite darkness in.